The Valerium was the heart of the mercenary ship Stardust Drifter, and its chambers beat with the silent pulse of violence. It was less a common area and more a sanctuary dedicated to the tools of the trade. The air itself was a unique cocktail found only in such places: the sharp, sterile scent of weapon solvent, the low hum of charging cells, and the faint metallic tang of ozone that clung to the bulkheads like a ghost. Polished chrome floor plates reflected the dim, functional lighting, creating an endless, distorted gallery of the figures within. This was not a place for conversation. It was a space for ritual, for the quiet communion between a warrior and his instrument of death. Each mercenary aboard had a station, an alcove fitted with a personalized weapons rack, and each rack was a testament to its owner's history, his philosophy, his soul. Grok's station was a monument to brute force, a four-armed giant from a world where the gravity could crush a lesser being into paste. Grok himself was a geological event. His skin had the rough, craggy texture of granite, and his movements, though slow, carried an undeniable sense of tectonic power. He was currently tending to his beloved quadrupeders, a set of weapons so heavy they would have been classified as vehicle-mounted artillery by most galactic armies. With two of his massive hands, he held one of the guns steady, while his other two hands worked with surprising delicacy, using a micro-tool to adjust the magnetic accelerator coils. He called them the negotiators, and the low, guttural rumble that passed for a chuckle in his chest suggested he found the name deeply amusing. His rack was thick with reinforced plating, groaning under the weight of his arsenal. Across the hall, the Cathar twins, Xyla and Xylo, performed a silent, synchronized ballet of maintenance. The Cathar were a lithe, insectoid race, their bodies encased in a sleek, chitinous exoskeleton the color of obsidian. Their movements were fluid and unnervingly precise, their heads tilting in perfect unison as they inspected their plasma scythes. The weapons were elegant and terrifying, crystalline blades that shimmered with contained violet energy, casting dancing, predatory shadows on the wall behind them. Xyla would polish a section of her blade, and a moment later, Xylo would mirror the exact same motion on his. They were two parts of a single killing machine, and their shared rack was a perfectly symmetrical display of lethal art. Others were present too. A reptilian sniper from the Sithis systems meticulously cleaned the lens of his long-range particle rifle, a weapon capable of piercing a ship's hull from 5,000 kilometers away. A brooding Corvasian warrior meditated before a rack holding a pair of crackling neurowhips, his eyes closed as he communed with their volatile energy. Every station was occupied, every rack a shrine. And then there was the human station. Lieutenant Eva Rostova's alcove was a void. It was an anomaly, a disruption in the violent harmony of the Valerium. Her weapon rack, forged from the same gunmetal steel as all the others, was immaculate. Its surface was polished to a mirror sheen. Its clasps and magnetic locks were perfectly maintained, free of dust or grime. But it was utterly, profoundly empty. There was no blaster pistol, no combat knife, no kinetic rifle, not even a single spare power cell. It was a blank space, a silent testament to nothing. Eva herself seemed to cultivate this sense of quiet absence. She was not a physically imposing figure. Her build was average, her dark hair was tied back in a severe, practical knot, and her uniform was standard issue, devoid of the personal flourishes and trophies the other mercenaries favored. At that moment, she was seated on a simple stool beside her empty station, her attention focused entirely on a small data pad. Her fingers moved across the screen with an unhurried efficiency, reviewing cargo manifests or diagnostic reports, a task utterly mundane in a room bristling with such lethal potential. She seemed oblivious to the stares, or perhaps she had simply grown accustomed to them. For weeks, her empty rack had been a source of whispers and quiet jokes. The other mercenaries, whose identities were so deeply intertwined with their weapons, could not comprehend it. They saw it as a sign of profound weakness, or worse, an insult. It was the arrogance of a creature who did not understand their ways, who did not respect the sanctity of the warrior's bond with his steel. The quiet ended when Grok finished his adjustments. He rose to his full, intimidating height, his head nearly scraping the ceiling pipes. He lumbered past Eva's station, his heavy footfalls thudding against the deck plates. He paused, looking from her focused expression to the gleaming, empty rack beside her. The low, grinding rumble began in his chest. "Careful not to cut yourself on the air, Rostova," he said, his voice an avalanche of gravel. "It looks sharp today." A few of the others permitted themselves a chuckle. Zyla and Xylo turned their heads in unison, their multifaceted eyes glittering with cold amusement. Eva didn't look up from her datapad. A full 3 seconds passed before she responded, her voice even and calm, carrying no hint of irritation or shame. "I'll try to manage, Grok." Her placid response seemed to annoy the giant more than any angry retort would have. He grunted, a sound of pure dismissal, and continued on his way. But the ice was broken. The mockery was now out in the open. Eva continued her work, her expression unchanged, but a certain tension had entered the room. Her stillness was no longer just quiet. It was a challenge. Her empty rack was no longer just a curiosity. It was a riddle. And in the Valerium, where every object had a deadly and obvious purpose, there was nothing more unnerving than a riddle. The other mercenaries watched her, their respect for her rank warring with their contempt for her apparent lack of a warrior's spirit. They saw a quiet woman with nothing to her name, sitting before a shrine to emptiness, and they could not have been more wrong. The silence that followed Grok's lumbering departure was heavier than the giant's footsteps. The brief moment of shared amusement had evaporated, leaving behind a thick residue of tension. Eva Rostova's continued, deliberate calm was a quiet defiance that grated on the nerves of warriors accustomed to clear displays of strength and aggression. It was a dissonant note in the symphony of the Valerium. The other mercenaries returned to their rituals, but their movements were now mechanical, their attention divided. They watched her from the corners of their eyes, waiting for the other shoe to drop. They did not have to wait long. The challenge, when it came, was as different from Grok's blunt mockery as a scalpel is from a sledgehammer. It came from Xylar. He was a Xylosian, a species renowned for its grace, speed, and breathtaking cruelty. He moved with a liquid silence that was unnerving, his padded feet making no sound on the deck plates. He was tall and slender, his body a sleek cord of muscle beneath dark, patterned fur. His face was angular and feline, with large, intelligent eyes that held a look of perpetual, predatory condescension. His station held a pair of wickedly curved vibro daggers, their edges humming at a frequency that set teeth on edge, alongside an assortment of poisons, garrots, and other tools of a silent killer. He was an artist of assassination, and he clearly felt Eva's presence was an affront to his craft. He detached himself from his alcove and flowed across the room, his path taking him directly to Eva's station. He stopped before her, casting a long shadow over her as she sat on her stool. He did not speak immediately, instead letting the silence stretch, a tactic designed to unnerve and assert dominance. The few remaining sounds in the hall, the soft click of a rifle bolt, the hum of a charging cell, died away. Every eye was now on them. Eva finished the last entry on her datapad, the soft chime of the saved file echoing slightly in the sudden stillness. She powered the device down and placed it carefully on the corner of the empty rack. Only then did she finally look up, her gaze meeting Xylar's without a trace of fear or deference. "Rostova," Xylar began, his voice a silky, resonant purr that dripped with false civility. "The captain has just finalized the assignments for the Corsair raid on OB7. You and I, along with Grok and the twins, are on the primary boarding team." He paused, letting the information sink in. "It is, I am told, a high-risk infiltration. The Corsairs are well armed and notoriously fond of close-quarters combat, a chaotic environment. He tilted his head, a gesture of mock contemplation, and flicked his gaze meaningfully toward her empty rack. This brings me to a point of concern, one that I believe the entire crew shares. His gesture was subtle, but it invited the others into the confrontation, making him their spokesman. In a chaotic environment, every member of the team must be a self-sufficient asset. Every member must contribute to the violence of action. Your lack of preparation is, therefore, a liability. He circled her slowly, like a shark sizing up its prey. Tell me, Lieutenant, when the plasma starts flying and the bulkheads are breached, what will be your contribution? When a Corsair brute charges your position, how will you defend the corridor? The rest of us will be occupied with our own battles. He stopped in front of her again, leaning in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. We carry the weight of our experience and our lethality on our racks for all to see. It is a promise of our capability. Your station promises nothing. What will you fight with, human? Harsh language. The insult hung in the air, sharp and venomous. This was it, the culmination of weeks of whispers and sideways glances. Eva looked at his arrogant, feline face. She saw the challenge in his eyes, the open contempt. The entire crew was watching, waiting for her to break, to lash out, to offer a frantic excuse. They expected a flash of human anger, a torrent of defensive words. They received none of it. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from the stool. She stood, not with the coiled readiness of a fighter, but with the immense, unyielding stillness of a mountain. She was shorter than the Xylosian, but somehow she did not seem smaller. She held his gaze for a long moment, the silence in the Valerium becoming absolute, a held breath. Then she raised her left hand. It was not a fist. It was not a gesture of aggression. With 2 fingers, she calmly hooked the high military-style collar of her uniform. With a soft rustle of fabric, she pulled it to the side. Her movement was economical and precise. She revealed the skin of her neck and the horrific silver-white scar that was etched into it. Her hand fell away, and she lifted her index finger again. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. She simply pointed. The polished chrome of the Valerium blurred. The low hum of the ship's life support faded, replaced by a different kind of silence, a dead silence, the kind that presses in on you, found only in the vacuum-sealed tombs men build on lifeless moons. The memory did not come to Eva in pieces. It crashed over her in a single, cold wave. The air in her lungs suddenly felt thin and frigid, tasting of recycled oxygen and fear. She was no longer a mercenary lieutenant on the Stardust Drifter. She was Officer Rostova, corporate security, standing in the bloodless, frozen corridors of the Icarus research outpost on Cygnus X1. 2 years ago. She had been younger then, her confidence brittle, her uniform still crisp. Her mission was simple on paper: investigate the communications blackout at Icarus Station. But everyone on the transport shuttle knew the truth. They were not on a rescue mission. They were on a hunt, and they were also the bait. Icarus was the last known location of a target so infamous it was spoken of only in hushed whispers in the highest corporate and military circles. It had no name, only a title: the Silent Judge. It was a ghost, an assassin that killed without a weapon, without a trace, leaving its victims with pristine armor, but shattered bones and ruptured organs. It killed with its mind. The station was a gallery of horrors. The science team was all there, frozen in the last moments of their lives. One man was slumped over a console, his head twisted at an impossible angle. Another woman was pinned to the ceiling, her limbs bent backwards, her face a mask of shock. There was no damage to the station, no sign of a struggle, just a collection of broken dolls. Eva's squad, a team of hardened corporate soldiers clad in heavy exo-armor, moved through the halls, their heavy breathing the only sound. They felt it before they saw anything, a pressure building behind the eyes. A faint, high-pitched whine at the very edge of hearing, the feeling of being watched by something that had no eyes. Eva was the key. Her company, in its infinite arrogance, had equipped her with an experimental psychic dampener, a device intended to make her invisible to the judge's senses. The plan was for her to locate the entity while it was distracted by her heavily armed squad mates. The plan lasted for 7 minutes. The pressure in her head suddenly intensified. The whine became a shriek. One by one, the comm links of her squad crackled and went silent. She heard a single choked gasp from her sergeant before his link died. She was alone. The dampener on her belt sparked, smoked, and went cold. The corporation's technology had failed. The presence descended upon her. It was not a feeling of simple malevolence. It was worse. It was a feeling of cold, analytical curiosity, like a scientist studying an insect before pinning it to a board. She saw nothing, but she felt its mind brush against hers, an intellect so vast, so ancient and pure in its purpose, that it felt like staring into the cold, empty void between galaxies. It expected to find what it always found: fear, panic, a simple chain of command, the primal urge to run. It was prepared for that. It was not prepared for a human. It struck. She felt no physical blow, but an invisible, irresistible force wrapped around her throat. It was a hand made of pure will, and it began to squeeze. Her feet lifted from the deck plate. The pressure was immense, tearing at the soft tissue of her neck, trying to rip her head from her shoulders. Her vision swam with black spots. Her lungs burned. It was toying with her, savoring the kill. It pushed its mind into hers, seeking the terror, the final surrender. And there, in the deepest recesses of her consciousness, it found its mistake. It did not find a simple, linear mind. It found chaos. It found a maelstrom. As her life was being squeezed out of her, Eva Rostova did not just feel fear. She fought back with the only weapon she had left: the messy, contradictory, gloriously irrational totality of her own mind. She didn't block. She flooded. She threw memories at it, not as a coherent stream, but as a psychic shrapnel blast. The memory of her father teaching her to ride a bicycle, the scraped knee, the taste of blood and dirt, the sound of rain on a tin roof during a childhood storm, the overwhelming, illogical rage she felt when her favorite coffee mug shattered, the complex bitterness of her first taste of alcohol, the lyrics to a stupid pop song stuck in her head, the quiet grief for a pet she had lost years ago, the warmth of the sun on her face, the anxiety about unpaid bills, the sudden, intrusive thought of what a chair would look like if it had knees. It was a tidal wave of pointless, beautiful, agonizing, mundane humanity. For an entity of pure, focused logic, it was poison. The judge's mind, a perfect crystal lattice of telekinetic purpose, could not process the chaotic onslaught. It could understand fear. It could not understand feeling fear, grief, love, and annoyance all at the same time over things that had no logical weight or importance. The psychic feedback loop was instantaneous. She felt its immense ancient consciousness recoil, not in pain, but in sheer, uncomprehending overload. The pressure on her mind became a shriek of its own. She felt a shattering, not of her bones, but of the presence itself. The telekinetic grip on her throat vanished. Eva crashed to the floor in a heap, gasping, a raw, ragged sound that was obscenely loud in the sudden, absolute silence. The pressure in her mind was gone. The station felt empty now, truly empty. Her hand trembled as she brought it up to her neck, her fingers coming away slick and warm with her own blood. She lay there on the cold deck, the ghost dead, the corporation's bounty claimed not by technology or tactics, but by the chaotic, stubborn, and utterly unbreakable storm of a single human soul. The cold silence of the Icarus outpost shattered, and the warm, humming air of the Valerium rushed back into Eva's lungs. The memory receded, leaving behind the phantom taste of sterile fear and the faint, throbbing ache in her neck that sometimes returned when she was tired. She was back. Her gaze, which had been turned inward to a scene 2 years gone, refocused with crystalline clarity on the face before her. Xylar, the sleek, arrogant assassin, was frozen, his yellow eyes locked on the puckered, silver-white line of tissue she had revealed. The Valerium was utterly still, the moment stretched thin and taut, like a wire. It was Grok who reacted first, the giant's stony jaw, which had been set in a line of amused contempt, slackened almost imperceptibly. His 4 hands, which were capable of crushing bulkhead doors, lay limp at his sides. He was a veteran of 100 campaigns across a dozen star systems. He had seen worlds burn and fleets die. He had also been a claims investigator for a brief, lucrative period, and he had read the sealed corporate report on the Icarus incident. The official record listed the cause of death for the entire facility as a cascading psychic phenomenon from an unidentified source. It listed a single survivor, found in critical condition with severe larynx trauma, cause unknown. He stared at the scar and then at the quiet human woman wearing it, and the impossible truth settled into his mind with the weight of a collapsing star. A soft, sharp clicking sound came from across the room. It was Xyla and Xylo, the Cathar twins. Their synchronized, predatory grace was broken. For the first time since coming aboard the Stardust Drifter, they moved independently of each other. Xyla took a single, involuntary step backward, her scythe held loosely in her grip. Xylo remained rigid, his mandibles parting slightly. As professional killers, they knew of every major assassin and every legendary weapon in the known galaxy. But the Silent Judge was not a legend they aspired to. It was a ghost story they used to frighten apprentices. It was the embodiment of a power beyond their comprehension, a force that made their elegant plasma scythes seem as crude and primitive as sharpened sticks. They were looking at the woman who had, by all accounts, killed a ghost. But the most profound reaction belonged to Xylar. He was standing so close he could see the faint, web-like patterns of the damaged tissue. The silky condescension drained from his face, replaced by a wave of dawning, horrified comprehension. His feline ears, which had been angled forward in aggressive curiosity, flattened against his skull. The fur on his neck bristled. He finally understood. He understood the quiet confidence that had infuriated him so much. It was not the arrogance of the untested, it was the deep, weary calm of the survivor. He understood the empty weapons rack. It was not a sign of weakness or a lack of preparation. It was a monument. It was a declaration more potent than any display of force. It said that the greatest threat she had ever faced could not be mounted on a wall. It said that the deadliest weapon in the universe was not a blade or a blaster, but the thing that could withstand a direct assault from a creature that killed with its mind. He replayed his own words in his head, and each one was a fresh sting of shame. What will you fight with? Harsh language? He had mocked her for being unarmed, when in reality she was the only one in the room who had faced a truly absolute weapon and won. His precious vibro daggers, his poisons, Grok's massive repeaters, they were all useless against a threat like that. They were tools for killing bodies. Ava Rostova had killed a mind. The sheer scale of that accomplishment was so far beyond his own experience that it induced a kind of vertigo. The silence in the room transformed. The earlier tension had been about dominance and social standing. This new silence was something else entirely. It was heavy with awe. The reptilian sniper, who had been watching with detached interest, slowly and deliberately lowered his particle rifle, placing it back on its rack with a soft click. Grok looked down at his own huge hands, then at his cannons, a flicker of profound re-evaluation in his stony eyes. They were all warriors, defined by the tools they used to exert their will upon the universe. They were now face to face with a will so strong it needed no tool. Xylar took a stumbling step back, his usual liquid grace gone, replaced by the jerky movements of a creature that has unexpectedly found itself in the presence of a superior predator. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. What could he say? An apology would be laughably inadequate. A challenge was now unthinkable. He felt a primal instinct he had not experienced since he was a cub, the urge to make himself smaller, to show his throat, to submit. He settled for a gesture from his own culture, one reserved for revered elders and victorious clan leaders. He lowered his head and gave a stiff, formal bow from the waist, a clear and unambiguous admission of his folly and her superiority. Eva watched him, her expression unreadable. She held his gaze for a moment longer before she let her collar fall back into place, the simple piece of fabric once again hiding the legendary wound. She did not smile. She did not offer a word of forgiveness or condemnation. The scar had said everything that needed to be said. She simply turned, picked up her datapad, and returned to her seat, her point made not with a shout, but with a whisper of past agony. The silence Xylar left in his wake was brittle. He retreated to his station, his fluid grace replaced by a stiff, formal bearing. He did not touch his vibro daggers. Instead, he stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the far bulkhead as if trying to solve an impossible equation. The spell was broken. Slowly, hesitantly, the other occupants of the Valerium returned to their tasks, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The subtle current of mockery that had once flowed through the room was gone, replaced by a deep, powerful undertow of respect that bordered on fear. No one spoke to Eva. No one needed to. The communication had already occurred on a level far more profound than mere words. When Grok finished his work, he lumbered past her station once more. This time, he did not speak. He simply paused, turned his massive, craggy head toward her, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement between equals, a sign of respect so rare from the giant that it was tantamount to a sworn oath. From across the hall, the Cathar twins, Xyla and Xylo, watched her. Their movements, once sharp and predatory, now seemed more measured, more observational. They were studying her, trying to learn the shape of her stillness, as if it were a martial arts form they had never encountered. The legend of the silent judge was no longer a ghost story from a distant star system. She was sitting right there, reviewing cargo manifests. An hour later, the call came for the pre-mission briefing. The five of them, Eva, Grok, Xylar, and the twins, gathered in the small holographic briefing room. The ship's captain, a grizzled human veteran named Thorn, stood before the tactical display. He was a man who missed nothing, and he immediately sensed the shift in his elite team's dynamic. He saw the new, wide berth they gave Eva. He saw the way Xylar refused to meet her eye. He saw the profound respect in Grok's posture. A slow smile touched the corner of his mouth. He had hand-picked Rostova precisely for the steel he knew was hidden beneath her quiet exterior. "The plan is simple," Thorn said, his voice raspy. "We breach the engine room here. The Corsairs will likely concentrate their forces at this primary junction." He pointed a finger at a glowing red corridor on the map. "They'll be expecting a frontal assault. They won't be expecting Rostova." He looked directly at Eva, and for the first time, the rest of the team understood that her inclusion had never been random. "Clear the path, Lieutenant. The rest of you, try to keep up." The raid was exactly as chaotic as predicted. The breach was explosive, a maelstrom of screaming alarms, flashing emergency lights, and the percussive thud of blaster fire against metal. Grok laid down a wall of suppressing fire, his cannons roaring. The Cathar twins moved like violet blurs, their plasma scythes cleaving through the first wave of Corsair pirates. Xylar, his focus narrowed to a razor's edge, dispatched enemies with a cold, silent efficiency. But just as Thorn had predicted, they became bogged down at the primary junction. A single, massive Corsair champion blocked the corridor. He was clad in customized heavy armor, and a portable energy shield shimmered in front of him, absorbing Grok's heavy bolts with ease. "I can't get a weak point," Xylar hissed over the comm, ducking behind cover as the champion returned fire with a heavy slag rifle. His shield is too strong. Then, through the chaos, Eva moved. She did not run. She walked forward with a calm, steady pace, the blaster bolts seeming to bend around her, missing by inches, as if she intuitively knew their path before they were even fired. The champion focused on her, seeing an easy, unarmored target. He bellowed a challenge and raised his rifle. Eva didn't even flinch. She kept walking until she was just beyond the edge of his shield. She didn't have a weapon in her hand. Her gaze was fixed on the warrior's face. "That armor," she said, her voice cutting through the din of battle, "was taken from a corporate officer on Demeter 4. You can tell by the custom shoulder plate. He was a good man, but he had a flaw. He always put too much weight on his left foot when he was nervous." The Corsair champion froze, his bravado faltering. How could she possibly know that? He instinctively glanced down at his own feet. It was only for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. In that moment of doubt, his shield wavered. It was not a grand attack that followed. Eva simply took 2 quick steps forward, her hand darting out like a serpent. She didn't strike his armor or his shield. Her fingers found a tiny, unshielded hydraulic cable running to his knee joint and, with a sharp, brutal twist, tore it loose. The champion's leg buckled with a hiss of depressurizing fluid. He roared in pain and surprise and crashed to the floor, his shield emitter sputtering and dying. The path was clear. Eva stepped over his writhing form without a second glance. Back in the Valerium, the mood was different. The victory was celebrated not with loud boasts, but with a quiet sense of awe. Later that evening, as Eva sat at her station, a young recruit, a boy from a farm world who had been on cleanup duty, approached her alcove. He was visibly nervous. In his hands, he held the slag rifle taken from the defeated Corsair champion. He did not speak. He simply stepped forward, placed the heavy rifle reverently onto the clasps of her empty rack, and backed away with a deep, respectful bow. Eva looked at the weapon. It was large, ugly, and powerful. It was a symbol. She then looked at the young recruit, and for the first time, a genuine, small smile touched her lips. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The boy's face lit up, and he hurried away. The story was complete. Her isolation was over. She was no longer the outsider. The weapon rack was no longer empty. It held a single trophy. It was not a weapon she had chosen, but a tribute she had earned. The polished, empty spaces on either side of it now seemed more significant than ever, a silent testament to the countless battles she had won without firing a single shot.